The Necklace by Guy De Maupassant. She was one of those pretty and charming girls who are sometimes, as if by a mistake of destiny, born in a family of clerks. She had no dowry, no expectations, no means of being known, understood, loved, wedded by any rich and distinguished man, and she let herself be married to a little clerk at the Ministry of Public Instruction. She dressed plainly because she could not dress well, but she was as unhappy as though she had really fallen from her proper station, since with women there is neither caste nor rank, and beauty, grace, and charm act instead of family and birth. Natural fineness, instinct for what is elegant, suppleness of wit, are the sole hierarchy, and make from women of the people the equals of the very greatest ladies. She suffered ceaselessly, feeling herself born for all the delicacies and all the luxuries. She suffered from the poverty of her dwelling, from the wretched look of the walls, and from the worn-out chairs, from the ugliness of the curtains. All those things, of which another woman of her rank would never even have been conscious, tortured her and made her angry. The sight of the little Breton peasant who did her humble housework aroused in her regrets which were despairing and distracted dreams. She thought of the silent antechambers hung with oriental tapestry, lit by tall bronze candelabra, and of the two great footmen in knee breeches who sleep in the big armchairs, made drowsy by the heavy warmth of the hot air stove. She thought of the long salons fitted up with ancient silk, of the delicate furniture carrying priceless curiosities, and of the coquettish perfumed boudoirs made for talks at 5 o'clock with intimate friends, and with men famous and sought after, whom all women envy and whose attention they all desire. When she sat down to dinner, before the round table covered with a tablecloth 3 days old, opposite her husband, who uncovered the soup tureen and declared with an enchanted air, "Ah, the good pot-au-feu! I don't know anything better than that." She thought of dainty dinners, of shining silverware, of tapestry which peopled the walls with ancient personages and with strange birds flying in the midst of a fairy forest, and she thought of delicious dishes served on marvellous plates, and of the whispered gallantries which you listen to with a sphinx-like smile while you are eating the pink flesh of a trout or the wings of a quail. She had no dresses, no jewels, nothing. And she loved nothing but that. She felt made for that. She would so have liked to please, to be envied, to be charming, to be sought after. She had a friend, a former schoolmate at the convent, who was rich, and whom she did not like to go and see any more, because she suffered so much when she came back. But one evening her husband returned home with a triumphant air, and holding a large envelope in his hand. "There," said he, "here is something for you." She tore the paper sharply, and drew out a printed card which bore these words: "The Minister of Public Instruction and Madame Georges Ramponneau request the honour of Monsieur and Madame Loisel's company at the Palace of the Ministry on Monday evening, January the 18th. Instead of being delighted, as her husband hoped, she threw the invitation on the table with disdain, murmuring, "What do you want me to do with that?" "But, my dear, I thought you would be glad. You never go out, and this is such a fine opportunity. I had awful trouble to get it. Everyone wants to go. It is very select, and they are not giving many invitations to clerks. The whole official world will be there." She looked at him with an irritated eye, and she said impatiently, "And what do you want me to put on my back?" He had not thought of that. He stammered, "Why, the dress you go to the theatre in. It looks very well to me." He stopped, distracted, seeing that his wife was crying. 2 great tears descended slowly from the corners of her eyes towards the corners of her mouth. He stuttered, What's the matter? What's the matter?" But by a violent effort she had conquered her grief, and she replied with a calm voice while she wiped her wet cheeks, "Nothing. Only I have no dress, and therefore I can't go to this ball. Give your card to some colleague whose wife is better equipped than I." He was in despair. He resumed, "Come, let us see, Mathilde. How much would it cost, a suitable dress which you could use on other occasions, something very simple?" She reflected several seconds, making her calculations and wondering also what sum she could ask without drawing on herself an immediate refusal and a frightened exclamation from the economical clerk. Finally, she replied, hesitatingly, "I don't know exactly, but I think I could manage it with 400 francs. He had grown a little pale, because he was laying aside just that amount to buy a gun and treat himself to a little shooting next summer on the plain of Nanterre, with several friends who went to shoot larks down there of a Sunday. But he said, "All right, I will give you 400 francs, and try to have a pretty dress." The day of the ball drew near, and Madame Loisel seemed sad, uneasy, anxious. Her dress was ready, however. Her husband said to her one evening, "What is the matter? Come, you've been so queer these last 3 days." And she answered, "It annoys me not to have a single jewel, not a single stone, nothing to put on. I shall look like distress. I should almost rather not go at all." He resumed, "You might wear natural flowers. It's very stylish at this time of the year. For 10 francs you can get 2 or 3 magnificent roses." She was not convinced. No, there's nothing more humiliating than to look poor among other women who are rich." But her husband cried, "Oh, how stupid you are! Go look up your friend, Madame Forestier, and ask her to lend you some jewels. You're quite thick enough with her to do that." She uttered a cry of joy. "Oh, it's true. I never thought of it." The next day she went to her friend and told her of her distress. Madame Forestier went to a wardrobe with a glass door, took out a large jewel box, brought it back, opened it, and said to Madame Loisel, "Choose, my dear." She saw first of all some bracelets, then a pearl necklace, then a Venetian cross, gold, and precious stones of admirable workmanship. She tried on the ornaments before the glass, hesitated, could not make up her mind to part with them, to give them back. She kept asking, "Haven't you any more?" "Why, yes, look, I don't know what you like." All of a sudden she discovered in a black satin box a superb necklace of diamonds, and her heart began to beat with an immoderate desire. Her hands trembled as she took it. She fastened it around her throat, outside her high-necked dress, and remained lost in ecstasy at the sight of herself. Then she asked, hesitating, filled with anguish, "Can you lend me that? Only that?" "Why, yes, certainly." She sprang upon the neck of her friend, kissed her passionately, then fled with her treasure. The day of the ball arrived. Madame Loisel made a great success. She was prettier than them all, elegant, gracious, smiling, and crazy with joy. All the men looked at her, asked her name, endeavoured to be introduced. All the attachés of the cabinet wanted to waltz with her. She was remarked by the minister himself. She danced with intoxication, with passion, made drunk by pleasure, forgetting all in the triumph of her beauty, in the glory of her success, in a sort of cloud of happiness composed of all this homage, of all this admiration, of all these awakened desires, and of that sense of complete victory which is so sweet to a woman's heart. She went away about 4 o'clock in the morning. Her husband had been sleeping since midnight in a little deserted anteroom with 3 other gentlemen whose wives were having a very good time. He threw over her shoulders the wraps which he had brought, modest wraps of common life, whose poverty contrasted with the elegance of the ball dress. She felt this and wanted to escape so as not to be remarked by the other women who were enveloping themselves in costly furs. Loisel held her back. Wait a bit. You will catch cold outside. I will go and call a cab." But she did not listen to him, and rapidly descended the stairs. When they were in the street, they did not find a carriage, and they began to look for one, shouting after the cabmen whom they saw passing by at a distance. They went down towards the Seine in despair, shivering with cold. At last they found on the quay one of those ancient noctambulant coupés which, exactly as if they were ashamed to show their misery during the day, are never seen round Paris until after nightfall. It took them to their door in the Rue des Martyrs, and once more, sadly, they climbed up homeward. All was ended for her, and as to him, he reflected that he must be at the ministry at 10 o'clock. She removed the wraps, which covered her shoulders, before the glass, so as once more to see herself in all her glory. But suddenly she uttered a cry. She had no longer the necklace around her neck. Her husband, already half undressed, demanded, "What is the matter with you?" She turned madly towards him. I've lost Madame Forestier's necklace." He stood up, distracted. "What? How? Impossible!" And they looked in the folds of her dress, in the folds of her cloak, in her pockets, everywhere. They did not find it. He asked, "You're sure you had it on when you left the ball?" "Yes, I felt it in the vestibule of the palace." "But if you had lost it in the street, we should have heard it fall. It must be in the cab." "Yes, probably. Did you take his number?" "No. And you, didn't you notice it?" "No." They looked, thunderstruck, at one another. At last Loisel put on his clothes. "I shall go back on foot," said he, "over the whole route which we have taken to see if I can't find it." And he went out. She sat waiting on a chair in her ball dress, without strength to go to bed, overwhelmed, without fire, without a thought. Her husband came back about 7 o'clock. He had found nothing. He went to police headquarters, to the newspaper offices, to offer a reward. He went to the cab companies, everywhere, in fact, whither he was urged by the least suspicion of hope. She waited all day in the same condition of mad fear before this terrible calamity. Loisel returned at night with a hollow, pale face. He had discovered nothing. "You must write to your friend," said he, "that you have broken the clasp of her necklace and that you are having it mended. That will give us time to turn around." She wrote at his dictation. At the end of a week they had lost all hope, and Loisel, who had aged 5 years, declared, "We must consider how to replace that ornament." The next day they took the box which had contained it, and they went to the jeweller whose name was found within. He consulted his books. "It was not I, madame, who sold that necklace. I must simply have furnished the case." Then they went from jeweller to jeweller, searching for a necklace like the other, consulting their memories, sick both of them with chagrin and with anguish. They found, in a shop at the Palais Royal, a string of diamonds which seemed to them exactly like the one they looked for. It was worth 40,000 francs. They could have it for 36. So they begged the jeweller not to sell it for 3 days yet, and they made a bargain that he should buy it back for 34,000 francs in case they found the other one before the end of February. Loisel possessed 18,000 francs which his father had left him. he would borrow the rest. He did borrow, asking 1,000 francs of one, 500 of another, 5 louis here, 3 louis there. He gave notes, took up ruinous obligations, dealt with usurers, and all the race of lenders. He compromised all the rest of his life, risked his signature without even knowing if he could meet it, and frightened by the pains yet to come, by the black misery which was about to fall upon him, by the prospect of all the physical privations and of all the moral tortures which he was to suffer, he went to get the new necklace, putting down upon the merchant's counter 36,000 francs. When Madame Loisel took back the necklace, Madame Forestier said to her with a chilly manner, "You should have returned it sooner. I might have needed it." She did not open the case, as her friend had so much feared. If she had detected the substitution, what would she have thought? What would she have said? Would she not have taken Madame Loisel for a thief? Madame Loisel now knew the horrible existence of the needy. She took her part, moreover, all on a sudden, with heroism. That dreadful debt must be paid. She would pay it. They dismissed their servant, they changed their lodgings, they rented a garret under the roof. She came to know what heavy housework meant and the odious cares of the kitchen. She washed the dishes, using her rosy nails on the greasy pots and pans. She washed the dirty linen, the shirts, and the dishcloths, which she dried upon a line. She carried the slops down to the street every morning, and carried up the water, stopping for breath at every landing. And, dressed like a woman of the people, she went to the fruiterer, the grocer, the butcher, her basket on her arm, bargaining, insulted, defending her miserable money sou by sou. Each month they had to meet some notes, renew others, obtain more time. Her husband worked in the evening making a fair copy of some tradesman's accounts, and late at night he often copied manuscript for 5 sous a page. And this life lasted 10 years. At the end of the 10 years they had paid everything with the rates of usury and the accumulations of the compound interest. Madame Loisel looked old now. She had become the woman of impoverished households, strong and hard and rough. With frowsy hair, skirts askew, and red hands, she talked loud while washing the floor with great swishes of water. But sometimes, when her husband was at the office, she sat down near the window, and she thought of that gay evening of long ago, of that ball where she had been so beautiful and so fated. What would have happened if she had not lost that necklace? Who knows? Who knows? How life is strange and how changeful. How little a thing is needed for us to be lost or to be saved. But one Sunday, having gone to take a walk in the Champs-Élysées to refresh herself from the labours of the week, she suddenly perceived a woman who was leading a child. It was Madame Forestier, still young, still beautiful, still charming. Madame Loisel felt moved. Was she going to speak to her? Yes, certainly. And now that she had paid, she was going to tell her all about it. Why not? She went up. "Good day, Jeanne." The other, astonished to be familiarly addressed by this plain goodwife, did not recognise her at all, and stammered, "But, Madame, I do not know you. You must have been mistaken." "No, I am Mathilde Loisel." Her friend uttered a cry. "Oh, my poor Mathilde! How you are changed!" "Yes, I have had days hard enough since I have seen you, days wretched enough, and that because of you." "Of me? How so?" "Do you remember that diamond necklace which you lent me to wear at the ministerial ball?" "Yes. Well?" "Well, I lost it." "What do you mean? You brought it back?" "I brought you back another just like it, and for this we have been 10 years paying. You can understand that it was not easy for us who had nothing. At last it is ended, and I am very glad." Madame Forestier had stopped. "You say that you bought a necklace of diamonds to replace mine?" "Yes. You never noticed it then? They were very like." And she smiled with a joy which was proud and naive at once. Madame Forestier, strongly moved, took her 2 hands. "Oh, my poor Mathilde! Why, my necklace was paste. It was worth at most 500 francs. The end. There you go. Nice depressing one to start with. Yeah. Oh no. Exactly. Very much. Oh no. Yeah. Oof. Big oof. The biggest of oofs. Yeah. Oh well. I'm not really sure if there's a moral in that one, but I guess check that the jewellery is expensive before borrowing it, maybe? Yeah, whoopsie. Also, hello, Andy Pants, nice to see you here. You're not late, no, everything is fine. Hope you are doing well. Have I missed anyone else coming in? Oh, Vlad Tepes. Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind, saying my voice is beyond perfect. Oh, I'm very flattered, thank you. But yeah, so that was... Yay! Someone got ruined. So yeah, that was the first one. Oops, sorry. Punched the mic. Let's try not to do that. I shall try and find where the second one went. Where is it? Where is it? Have I considered recording audiobooks? I mean, why buy diamonds when costume jewellery shines just as well? Very true. Very true. Yes, so for those asking about audiobooks, we do now do more professionally recorded versions of the stories that we have already streamed on Twitch, so it's not anything not anything that anyone's missing out on, but we now do that on Bandcamp. So if you would like to go there and receive more stories, but in a slightly more kind of compact format and slightly more professionally recorded, and ones that you can download and listen to whenever you want at your leisure, then hop on over there. You can subscribe for £20 a year, an absolute bargain, and you get monthly instalments of either short stories or a longer novel, basically you get each one a month in advance before every, like, you can also, I'm doing well here, my brain's hurting. Yes, so if you're not subscribed, you can still get those, but they will release a month later than the subscriber versions, if that makes sense. Generally around 2 hours of reading a month, yeah. So it's 2 hours of content, around that, usually, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, mainly a bit more. Yeah, if you want some nice, uninterrupted by random chatty bits and mistakes, then you can head on over there for more good things, more nice words read nicely. Nice words read nicely, yeah. We can exchange currency for the pleasure of your dulcet tones. Thanks Andy, for making it slightly more concise. Yes, that. Exactly that. And it would be really nice if people could go on and go over there and do that, because nice words read nicely. Yes, thanks. Because Sam and I put a lot of effort into recording them, and I put a lot of effort into editing them. So would be nice to see people enjoying that. That should be your Twitter bio. God, I don't actually know what my Twitter bio. Oh my goodness, Twitter bio is, but I know my Facebook one is has trumpets will doot. But yes, right. How long's this one? Yeah, let's do that one. Right. This next one is from Czechia. So apologies to anyone who knows how to pronounce any of these names. House trumpets will do it sounds vaguely threatening. Yep, it's the general idea. I am indeed vaguely threatening. Short but mighty. This is a story by Svatopluk Czech or Czech. I'm not entirely sure. I apologise if I completely butchered that. But yeah, this is a story from Czechia. Svatopluk Czech. That. So yeah, let's read that. Yeah, apologies for the inevitable butchering of Czech pronunciation. Is there an accent above the C? There is at the first one. Well, an accent is one of those down arrow ones. And no, that's not cute, is it? I don't know what the down arrow ones are called. Those ones. The V accent, that one. Yes, like that. How do I pronounce that? Is that a ch sound or a k sound? Yeah, that's the guy. I'm waiting for the pronunciation here. Also, is it Svatopluk? I don't know. Or is it like something different? Am I butchering that pronunciation too? Don't know how to convey it in English. Well, that's fine. Okay, well, no worries. Apologies in advance. Right, this is Foltyn's Drum by Svatopluk Czech. If that's how you pronounce it. Old Foltyn hung on his shoulder his huge drum, venerable relic of glorious patriarchal ages, and went out in front of the castle. It seemed as if indulgent time had spared the drummer for the sake of the drum. The tall, bony figure of Foltyn, standing in erect perpendicularity in soldier fashion, wrapped in a sort of Ulan cape, with a face folded in numberless furrows, in which, however, traces of fresh colour and bright blue eyes preserved a youthful appearance, with a bristly grey beard and grey stubble on his double chin, a broad scar on his forehead, and a dignified uniformity in every motion, was the living remnant of the former splendour of the nobility. Old Foltyn was the gatekeeper at the castle, an honour which was an inheritance in the Foltyn family. As in the Middle Ages, vassal families devoted themselves exclusively to the service of their ruler, so the Foltyn family for many generations had limited its ambitions to the rank of gatekeepers, stewards, granary masters, herdsmen, and game wardens in the service of the noble proprietors of the castle. Indeed, one member of the family had become a footman for one of the former masters, and thereby the boast and proud memory of his numerous kinsmen. Well then, old Foltyn stepped forth with his drum before the castle, to all appearances as if he wished to drum forth the mayor and the councilman to some exceedingly important official duty, but in truth, alas, to noisefully assemble an army of old women to their work on the noble domain. He slightly inclined his head and swung the sticks over the ancient drum. But what was that? After several promising beginnings, he suddenly concluded his performance by a faint tap. I am convinced that many an old woman, hearing that single indistinct sound, dropped her spoon in amazement and pricked up her ears. When that mysterious sound was followed by no other, she doubtless threw a shawl over her grey braids, and running to the cottage across the way, met its occupant and read on her lips the same question her own were forming. What happened to old Foltyn that he finished his afternoon artistic performance with such an unheard-of turn? It happened thus. If you had stood in Foltyn's place at the stated moment, and if you had had his falcon eyes, you would have descried beyond the wood at the turn of the waggon road some sort of dark object which with magic swiftness approached the village. Later you would have distinguished a pair of horses and a carriage of a type never before seen in these regions. When the gatekeeper had arrived at this result of his observation, he recovered suddenly from the absolute petrifaction into which he had been bewitched by the appearance of the object, and raced as fast as his legs would allow back to the castle. Berushka, the steward's assistant, was just bidding a painful farewell to a beautiful cut of the roast over which the fork of his chief was ominously hovering, when Foltyn with his drum burst into the room without even rapping. He presented a remarkable appearance. He was as white as chalk, his eyes were staring blankly, on his forehead were beads of sweat, while he moved his lips dumbly and waved his drumstick in the air. With astonishment, all turned from the table toward him, and were terrified in advance at the news whose dreadful import was clearly manifested in the features of the old man. The nobility, he stuttered after a while. What? Burst forth the steward, dropping his fork on the plate. The nobility beyond the wood, answered Foltyn with terrible earnestness. The steward leaped from his place at the table, seized his Sunday coat, and began in his confusion to draw it on over his striped dressing gown. His wife, for some unaccountable reason, began to collect the silver from the table. Miss Melanie swished as she fled across the room. Berushka alone stood unmoved, looking with quiet satisfaction at his chief, whom Nemesis had suddenly overtaken at his customary culling of the choicest pieces of the roast. In order to interpret these events, I must explain that our castle, possibly for its distance and lack of conveniences, was very little in favour with its proprietors. From the period of the now deceased old master, who sojourned here a short time before his death, it had not beheld a single member of the noble family within its weather-beaten walls. The rooms on the first floor, reserved for the nobility, were filled with superfluous luxury. The spiders, their only occupants, let themselves down on fine threads from the glitteringly coloured ceilings to the soft carpets, and wove their delicate webs around the ornamentally carved arms of chairs, upholstered in velvet. The officials and servants in the castle knew their masters only by hearsay. They painted them as they could with ideal colours, to be sure. From letters, from various rumours carried from one manor to the next, from imagination, they put together pictures of all those personages who, from a distance, like gods, with invisible hands reached out and controlled their destinies. In clear outlines there appeared the images of barons, baronesses, the young baronets and sisters, the maids, nurses, the wrinkled, bewigged proctor, the English governess with a sharp nose, the fat footman. The peculiarities of each were known to them in the minutest detail. But to behold these constant objects of their dreams and discussions, these ideals of theirs, face to face, was for them a prospect at once blinding and terrifying. In the castle, feverish excitement reigned. From the upper rooms echoed the creaking of folding doors, the noise of furniture being pushed hither and thither, the whisking of brooms and brushes. The steward's wife ran about the courtyard from the chicken house to the stables without a definite purpose. The steward hunted up various keys and daybooks and charged the blame for all the disorder on the head of Berushka, who, suspecting nothing, was just then in the office, rubbing perfumed oil on his blonde hair. Old Foltyn stood upright in the driveway, with his drum swung from his shoulder, every muscle in his face twitching violently as he extended his hand with the drumstick in the direction of the approaching carriage, as if, like Joshua of old, he extricated it, commanding it to tarry in tarry in the village until all was in readiness. Through his old brain there flashed visions of splendidly ornamented portals, maids of honour, schoolboys, an address of welcome, flowers on the pathway, but the carriage did not pause. With the speed of the wind it approached the castle. One could already see on the road from the village the handsome bays with flowing bright manes and the liveried coachman glittering on the box. A blue-grey cloud of dust arose above the carriage and enveloped a group of gaping children along the wayside. Hardly had Foltyn stepped aside a little and doffed his shaggy cap, hardly had the soft white silhouette of Melanie disappeared in the ground-floor window when the eminent visitors rattled into the driveway. In the carriage sat a gentleman and a lady. He was of middle age, wore elegant black clothes, and had a smooth, oval, white face with deep shadows around the eyes. He appeared fatigued and sleepy, and yawned at times. The lady was young, a fresh-looking brunette with a fiery, active glance. She was dressed in light colours, and with a sort of humorous, coquettish smile, she gazed all around. When they entered the driveway, where practically all the occupants of the castle welcomed them with respectful curtsies, the dark gentleman fixed his weary, drowsy eyes on old Foltyn, who stood in the foreground with loosely hanging moustaches, with endless devotion in his honest blue eyes, and with an expression of contrite grief in his wrinkled face, his patriarchal drum at his hip. The Baron looked intently for a while at this interesting relic of the inheritance from his ancestors. Then the muscles of the languid face twitched, and his lordship relieved his mood by loud, candid laughter. The bystanders looked for a moment with surprise from the Baron to the gatekeeper and back again. Then they regarded it as wise to express their loyalty by blind imitation of his unmistakable example, and they all laughed the best they knew how. The steward and his wife laughed somewhat constrainedly, the light-minded barouchka and the coachman with the lackey most heartily. Even the Baroness smiled slightly in the most bewitching manner. Old Foltyn at that moment presented a picture which it is not easy to describe. He looked around several times, paled and reddened by turns, patted down his cape and grey beard in embarrassment, and his gaze finally slid to the fatal drum. It seemed to him that he comprehended it all. He was crushed. After a few condescending words to the others, the nobility betook themselves to their quarters, leaving for the time being on the occupants of the lower floors the impression that they were the most handsome and the happiest couple in all the world. After a while, we behold both in the general reception room. The master rocks carelessly in the easy-chair and sketches a likeness of old Foltyn on the covers of some book. The Baroness, holding in her hand a naked antique statuette, looks about the room searchingly. "Advise me, Henry. Where shall I place it?" "You should have left it where it was." "Not at all. We are inseparable. I would have been lonesome for those tender, oval marble features." "But if you haul her around this way over the world, she won't last whole very long." "Never fear. I'll guard her like the apple of my eye. You saw that I held the box containing her on my lap throughout the journey." You might better get a pug dog, my dear." The Baroness flashed an angry glance at her husband. Her lips opened to make response to his offensive levity, but she thought better of it. She held the statuette carefully and swished disdainfully past the Baron in the direction of a rounded niche in the wall. She was just about to deposit her charming burden, when suddenly, as if stung by a serpent, she recoiled and extended a finger towards her husband. The dust of many years accumulated in the niche had left its grey trace. "Look!" she cried. "Look!" he repeated, pointing towards the ceiling. From the bouquet of fantastic flowers there hung a long, floating cobweb on which an ugly spider was distinctly swinging. "You wouldn't listen to my warnings? Well, here you have an introduction to that heavenly rural idyll of which you raved." The Baroness drew down her lips in disgust at the spider and in displeasure at her husband's remark. Violently she rang the bell on the table. The fat footman in his purple livery appeared. "Tell them down below to send some girl here to wipe down the dust and cobwebs," the lovely mistress said to him with a frowning brow. She sat down opposite her husband, who was smiling rather maliciously, and gazed with vexation at her beloved statuette. A considerable time passed, but no maid appeared. The Baroness showed even greater displeasure in her countenance, while the Baron smiled more maliciously than ever. The footman's message caused great terror below on account of the dust and the cobwebs, and no less embarrassment on account of the request for a maid. After long deliberation and discussion, they seized upon Foltyn's Maryanka as a drowning man grasps at a straw. After many admonitions from old Foltyn, who hoped through his daughter to make up for the unfortunate drum, they drew out the resisting girl from the gatekeeper's lodge. The steward's wife with her own hands forced on Maryanka her own yellow silk kerchief with a long fringe which she folded across her bosom, placed an immense sweeping brush in her hands, and thus arrayed the footman led his trembling victim into the master's apartments. The Baroness had just stamped her foot angrily and approached the door when it softly opened, and Maryanka, pale as the wall, with downcast eye, appeared in it. The unkind greeting was checked on the Baroness's lips. The charm of the simple maid surprised her. Slender she was, and supple as a reed, her features gentle and childishly rounded, the rich brown hair contrasting wonderfully with her fresh white skin, and her whole appearance breathing the enchantment of earliest springtime. "Here, dear child," she said to her agreeably, pointing to the floating cobweb. The girl bowed awkwardly, and for an instant under her light lashes there was a flash of dark blue as she stepped timidly forward. The brush did not reach the cobweb. She had to step up on her tiptoes. Her entire face flushed with a beautiful red glow, her dark blue eye lifted itself towards the ceiling, her delicate white throat was in full outline, and below it there appeared among the fringes of the yellow shawl a string of imitation corals on the snow-white folds of her blouse. Add to this the dainty foot of a princess, and acknowledge it was an alluring picture. When all that was objectionable had been removed, the Baroness tapped Maryanka graciously on the shoulder and asked, "What is your name?" "Marie Foltynova," whispered the girl. "Foltyn. Foltyn, what is your father?" "The gatekeeper, your grace." "Doubtless the man with the drum," suggested the Baron, and a light smile passed over his face. "Go into the next room and wait for me," said the Baroness to the girl. When she had departed, the Baroness turned to her husband with these words, "A charming maiden. What do you think of her?" "Well, it's a matter of taste." "I say, charming. Unusually beautiful figure, a most winsome face, and withal such modesty." "The statuette is threatened by a rival." "Jokes aside, what do you say to my training her to be a lady's maid, to taking her into service? What do you say to it?" "That your whims are, in truth, quite varied," he answered, yawning. The Baroness indulged her whim with great energy. She immediately asked the girl if she would like to go to the city with her, and not even waiting for her answer, engaged her at once in her service, rechristened her Marryat, described in brilliant colours the position of a lady's maid, and at the end made her a present of a pair of slightly worn slippers and a coquettish house cap. Old Foltyn was fairly numbed with joyous surprise when Maryanka, with the great news, returned to him. Even in his dreams he would not have thought that his daughter would be chosen by fate to become the glittering pendant to that footman of whose relationship the entire Foltyn family boasted. Instantly he forgot the incident of the drum, his gait became sturdier, and his eyes glowed like a youth's. Several days passed. The Baroness continued enthusiastic about the delights of country life, and devoted herself with great eagerness to the education of Marryat as a lady's maid. Marryat often stood in front of the mirror, wearing the coquettish cap, and holding in her soft hand the large tuft of many-coloured feathers which the mistress had purchased for her for brushing off the dust. Often, too, she sat on the low stool, her eyes gazing dreamily somewhere into the distance, where, in imagination, she saw tall buildings, beautifully dressed people, and splendid equipages. Frequently she would bury her head in her hands and lose herself in deep thought. The Baron would sit idly in the easy-chair, smoking and yawning. The steward and his wife rid themselves of all fears of their eminent guests. Barushka made friends with the purple footman, playing 26 with him in the office behind closed doors when they lighted their pipes. Once towards evening, the Baroness, with her beautifully bound Burns, stepped out into the flower-covered arbour in the park, from which place there was a distant and varied view, and where she hoped to await the Nightingale concert, which for several evenings had echoed in the neighbourhood of the castle. The Baron rebuked the footman for his fatness, and ordered him to begin reducing by taking a walk out into the fields. The steward and his wife were putting up fruit behind closed doors. Melanie had a toothache. In this idyllic, peaceful moment, it occurred to old Foltyn that Maryanka was lingering an unusually long time in the apartments of the nobility. He disposed of the thought, but it returned soon again. The thought became every moment more and more obtrusive. "What is she doing there so long?" he growled into his moustaches. "The mistress is not in the house." Involuntarily he went into the gallery and walked about a while, listening intently to sounds from above. Then he ventured on the steps, urged by an irresistible force. On tiptoes he reached the corridor of the first floor. He stole to the footman's door and pressed the knob. It was closed. He crept to the door of the reception room. Suddenly he paused. Within could be heard a voice, the voice of the Baron. Distinctly he heard these words: "Don't be childish, foolish whims. The world is different from what the priests and your simple-minded parents have painted it for you. I will make you happy. Whatever you wish you will get. Beautiful clothes, jewels, money, all. I will make your father a butler, steward, maybe something even higher. You will be in the city yourself. Now, my little dove, don't be ashamed. Lift up your lovely eyes. God knows I never saw more beautiful ones." Foltyn stood as if thunderstruck. All the blood receded from his face. Horror and fright were depicted in it. He stooped down to the keyhole. Within he beheld the Baron wholly changed. In his pale, handsome countenance there was not a single trace of sleepiness, and his dark eyes flashed with passion underneath the thin, proud brows. Uplifting by the chin Maryanka's beautiful face, flushed deep scarlet with shame, he gazed lustfully upon her heaving bosom. Her eyes were cast down. In one hand she held a statuette, in the other the tousled tuft of variegated feathers. Foltyn put his hands up to his grey head. Anguish contracted his throat. Through his head rushed a whirl of terrible thoughts. Already he had reached for the doorknob, then quickly jerked his hand away. No, to have the Baron learn that Maryanka's father had listened to his words, to stand shamed and apprehended in an abominable deed before his own servant, no, that must not be. All of Foltyn's inborn loyalty rose in opposition. But what was he to do? In the office was the footman. He would send him upstairs on some pretext. No sooner thought of than he hastened down, but the office was closed, and perfect silence reigned within. Barushka and the footman, who had but recently been playing cards inside, were not at home. One was in the courtyard, the other out for a health promenade. In desperation, Foltyn ran down the corridor. Suddenly, he paused in front of the jail room. He stood but a moment, and then burst open the door, seized the immense drum hanging there, hung it over his shoulder, and ran out into the driveway. Wildly he swung the drumsticks, bowed his head, and then a deafening rattle resounded. He beat the drum until beads of sweat stood out on his brow. The steward, hearing the clatter, turned as pale as death. "In God's name, Foltyn has gone mad!" he burst out. He flew to the driveway. There he beheld Barushka, holding a card hand of spades in one hand and the collar of the unsummoned drummer in the other. "Are you drunk?" shouted the clerk. Foltyn continued obstinately to beat the drum. From all sides figures came running in the dusk. The steward came to Barushka's assistance. "Stop, you maniac!" he thundered at Foltyn. "Don't you know the Baron is already sleeping? I'll drive you out of service immediately." "Oh, just let him stay in service," sounded the voice of the Baron behind them. "He is a capital drummer." Then he passed through the bowing crowd, whistling and switching his riding boots with his whip. He was going for a walk. When the Baroness, attracted hither by the mysterious sound of the drum, had returned from the Nightingale's concert and entered the reception room, she beheld in the middle of it her beautiful, beloved statuette broken into many bits. From the weeping eyes of Marryat, whom she summoned before her, she at once learned the perpetrator. In great wrath she dismissed her from her service on the spot. Short was the dream of tall buildings, beautiful people, and splendid equipage. At noon of the next day, Foltyn stood in front of the castle and drummed the peasants to their labours. At the same time he gazed towards the forest road down which the noble carriage, with marvellous speed, was receding into the distance. When the carriage disappeared into the forest, Foltyn breathed a sigh of relief, dropped the drumsticks, and shook his head. And then the thought came into his head that, like the drum, he no longer belonged to the present era of the world. As to the cause of the disturbance of the day before, he preserved an obstinate silence unto the day of his death. The end. Ah, good job, mate. You saved your daughter. Oh, were we talking about languages in chat? Can't help but mentally follow old woman with, "I'm not an old woman, I'm a man." Well, my name's, what is it? Dennis. That's the one. Yeah. But also, hey, Ketar Cat. Hope you are well. Welcome in. Nice to see you. Dun dun dun. Yeah. But I'm just, yeah, very good. Yeah. Sam, we are not going through the entire sketch in chat, okay? Not happening. As tempting as it is. But you could have asked. Okay. Let's go to a break. Everybody go do break related things, and we will see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. Hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a good break. I have made myself a tea, which will be far too hot to drink, and I will have to keep on reminding myself of that, because otherwise I will burn my face on it. Well, face, mouth, lip, other things, tongue. Can't really burn teeth. But yes, hope you've all had a good break, had a nice chilled time, and got like a tea or something, or I don't know, snack. Or a cat. Cats are also good. We like cats here. Yes, this tea is too hot. Why am I trying to drink it? I don't know. I do this every time, and I always burn my tongue because I'm an idiot. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this. You have indeed acquired a cat, Andy Pants. Excellent. Good job. You are already ahead in the game of life. Good job. She's making it hard to type. Oh, I mean, yes, that's cats, isn't it? I suspect Joey might be sitting on or near Sam at the moment, and probably also making it hard to type. Because that's what cats do. Bless them. He is on. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Well, at least he's on you and not the laptop. That is progress. Very minor progress, but progress nonetheless. But yes, so we had a couple of stories from various places in the world, mainly of people having a bad time with money, or moneyed people. So I thought, let's go a completely different route for the next one, and let's do a bit of a ship-related story. Not just ship, but ghost ship. We get two of the things we like in one: ships and ghosts. So, yeah, hope you're ready for that. Let's buckle up. So, this is... Ooh, indeed, yeah. This will be our last story for today, I think, because it's a fairly long one. Might not last the entire time until 11, but we won't have time for another one after that. So, yeah. Ghost ships, the best kind of ships? Absolutely. I kind of feel like we should have Downed and Drowned playing in the background for this, but we don't. Yes, I hope you are all sitting comfortably and feeling spooky. And we shall read The Phantom Ship by Captain Marryat. The ship was ready to sail for Europe, and Philip Vanderdecken went on board, hardly caring whither he went. To return to Ternus was not his object. He could not bear the idea of revisiting the scene of so much happiness and so much misery. Amina's form was engraven on his heart, and he looked forward with impatience to the time when he should be summoned to join her in the land of spirits. He had awakened as if from a dream after so many years of aberration of intellect. He was no longer the sincere Catholic that he had been, for he never thought of religion without his Amina's cruel fate being brought to his recollection. Still he clung on to the relic. He believed in that, and that only. It was his God, his creed, his everything, the passport for himself and for his father into the next world, the means whereby he should join his Amina, and for hours would he remain holding in his hand that object so valued, gazing upon it, recalling every important event in his life, from the death of his poor mother and his first sight of Amina to the last dreadful scene. It was to him a journal of his existence, and on it were fixed all his hopes for the future. When, oh, when is it to be accomplished? Was the constant subject of his reveries. Blessed indeed will be the day when I leave this world of hate and seek that other in which the weary are at rest. The vessel on board of which Philip was embarked as a passenger was the Nostra Senhora da Monte, a brig of 300 tons, bound for Lisbon. The captain was an old Portuguese man, full of superstition and fond of arrack, a fondness rather unusual with the people of his nation. They sailed from Goa, and Philip was standing abaft and sadly contemplating the spire of the cathedral in which he had last parted with his wife, when his elbow was touched, and he turned around. "Fellow passenger again," said a well-known voice. It was that of the pilot, Schriften. There was no alteration in the man's appearance. He showed no marks of declining years. His one eye glared as keenly as ever. Philip started, not only at the sight of the man, but at the reminiscences which his unexpected appearance brought to his mind. It was but for a second, and he was again calm and pensive. "You here again, Schriften?" observed Philip. "I trust your appearance forebodes the accomplishment of my task." "Perhaps it does," replied the pilot. "We both are weary." Philip made no reply. He did not even ask Schriften in what manner he had escaped from the fort. He was indifferent about it, for he felt that the man had a charmed life. "Many are the vessels that have been wrecked, Philip van der Decken, and many the souls summoned to their account by meeting with your father's ship while you have been so long shut up," observed the pilot. "May our next meeting with him be more fortunate. May it be the last," replied Philip. "No, no, rather may he fulfil his doom and sail till the day of judgment," replied the pilot with emphasis. "Vile caitiff, I have a foreboding that you will not have your detestable wish. Away, leave me, or you shall find that although this head is blanched by misery, this arm has still some power." Schriften scowled as he walked away. He appeared to have some fear of Philip, although it was not equal to his hate. He now resumed his former attempts of stirring up the ship's company against Philip, declaring that he was a Jonas who would occasion the loss of the ship, and that he was connected with the Flying Dutchman. Philip very soon observed that he was avoided, and he resorted to counter-statements equally injurious to Schriften, whom he declared to be a demon. The appearance of Schriften was so much against him, while that of Philip, on the contrary, was so prepossessing, that the people on board hardly knew what to think. They were divided. Some were on the side of Philip, some on that of Schriften, the captain and many others looking with equal horror on both, and longing for the time when they could be sent out of the vessel. The captain, as we have before observed, was very superstitious, and very fond of his bottle. In the morning he would be sober and pray. In the afternoon he would be drunk, and swear at the very saints whose protection he had invoked but a few hours before. "May holy Saint Antonio preserve us, and keep us from temptation," said he on the morning after a conversation with the passengers about the phantom ship. "All the saints protect us from harm," continued he, taking off his hat reverentially and crossing himself. "Let me but rid myself of these two dangerous men without accident, and I will offer up 100 wax candles of 3 ounces each to the shrine of the Virgin upon my safe anchoring off the Tower of Belem." In the evening he changed his language. "Now, if that maledetto Saint Antonio don't help us, may he feel the coals of hell yet. Damn him and his pigs too. If he has the courage to do his duty, all will be well. But he is a cowardly wretch. He cares for nobody, and will not help those who call upon him in trouble. Carambo, that for you!" exclaimed the captain, looking at the small shrine of the saint at the binnacle, and snapping his fingers at the image. "That for you, you useless wretch, who never helps us in our trouble. The Pope must canonize some better saints for us, for all we have are now worn out. They could do something formerly, but now I would not give 2 ounces of gold for the whole calendar. As for you, you lazy old scoundrel," continued the captain, shaking his fist at poor Saint Antonio. The ship had now gained off the southern coast of Africa, and was about 100 miles from Agulhas coast. The morning was beautiful. A slight ripple only turned over the waves. The breeze was light and steady, and the vessel was standing on a wind at the rate of about 4 miles an hour. "Blessed be the holy saints," said the captain, who had just gained the deck. "Another little slant in our favour, and we shall lay our course. Again I say, blessed be the holy saints, and particularly our worthy patron Saint Antonio, who has taken under his peculiar protection the Nostra Senora da Monte. We have a prospect of fine weather. Come, signors, let us down to breakfast, and after breakfast we will enjoy our cigarros on the deck. But the scene was soon changed. A bank of clouds rose up from the eastward, with a rapidity that, to the seaman's eyes, was unnatural, and it soon covered the whole firmament. The sun was obscured, and all was one deep and unnatural gloom. The wind subsided, and the ocean was hushed. It was not exactly dark, but the heavens were covered with one red haze, which gave an appearance as if the world was in a state of conflagration. In the cabin the increased darkness was first observed by Philip, who went on deck. He was followed by the captain and passengers, who were in a state of amazement. It was unnatural and incomprehensible. "Now, Holy Virgin, protect us! What can this be?" exclaimed the captain in a fright. "Holy Saint Antonio, protect us! But this is awful." "There! There!" shouted the sailors, pointing to the beam of the vessel. Every eye looked over the gunwale to witness what had occasioned such exclamations. Philip, Shrifton, and the captain were side by side. On the beam of the ship, not more than 2 cables' length distant, they beheld, slowly rising out of the water, the tapering masthead and spars of another vessel. She rose, and rose gradually. Her topmasts and topsail yards, with the sails set, next made their appearance. Higher and higher she rose up from the element. Her lower masts and rigging, and lastly her hull, showed itself above the surface. Still she rose up till her ports with her guns, and at last the whole of her floatage was above water, and there she remained close to them, with her mainyard squared, and hove to. "Holy Virgin!" exclaimed the captain, breathless. "I have known ships to go down, but never to come up before. Now will I give 1,000 candles of 10 ounces each to the shrine of the Virgin to save us in this trouble. 1,000 wax candles. Hear me, blessed lady, 10 ounces each. Gentlemen," cried the captain to the passengers, who stood aghast, "why don't you promise? Promise, I say, promise at all events." "The phantom ship! The Flying Dutchman!" shrieked Shrifton. "I told you so, Philip van der Decken. There is your father!" Philip's eyes had remained fixed on the vessel. He perceived that they were lowering down a boat from her quarter. "It is possible," thought he, "I shall now be permitted." And Philip put his hand into his bosom and grasped the relic. The gloom now increased, so that the strange vessel's hull could but just be discovered through the murky atmosphere. The seamen and passengers threw themselves down on their knees and invoked the saints. The captain ran down for a candle to light before the image of Saint Antonio, which he took out of its shrine and kissed with much apparent affection and devotion, and then replaced. Shortly afterwards the splash of oars was heard alongside, and a voice calling out, "I say, my good people, give us a rope from forward." No one answered, or complied with the request. Shrifton only went up to the captain, and told him that if they offered to send letters, they must not be received, or the vessel would be doomed, and all would perish. A man now made his appearance from over the gunwale at the gangway. "You might as well have let me had a side rope, my hearties," said he as he stepped on deck. "Where is the captain?" "Here," replied the captain, trembling from head to foot. The man who accosted him appeared a weather-beaten seaman, dressed in a fur cap and canvas petticoats. He held some letters in his hand. "What do you want?" at last screamed the captain. "Yes, what do you want?" continued Shrifton. "What, you here, pilot?" observed the man. "Well, I thought you had gone to Davy's locker long enough ago." replied Shrifton, turning away. Why, the fact is, Captain, we have had very foul weather, and we wish to send letters home. I do believe that we shall never get round this cape. I can't take them, cried the captain. Can't take them? Well, it's very odd, but every ship refuses to take our letters. It's very unkind. Seamen should have a feeling for brother seamen, especially in distress. God knows we wish to see our wives and families again, and it would be a matter of comfort to them if only they could hear from us. I cannot take your letters. The saints preserve us, replied the captain. We have been a long while out, said the seaman, shaking his head. How long? Inquired the captain, not knowing what to say. We can't tell. Our almanac was blown overboard, and we have lost our reckoning. We never have our latitude exact now, for we cannot tell the sun's declination for the right day. Let me see your letters, said Philip, advancing and taking them out of the seaman's hands. They must not be touched, screamed Shrifton. Out, monster, replied Philip, who dares interfere with me? Doomed! 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 Shrieked Shrifton, running up and down the deck, and then breaking into a wild fit of laughter. Touch not the letters, said the captain, trembling as if in an ague fit. Philip made no reply, but held out his hand for the letters. Here is one from our second mate, to his wife at Amsterdam, who lives on Wezer Quay. Wezer Quay has been long gone, my good friend. There is now a large dock for ships where once it was, replied Philip. Impossible, replied the man. Here is another from the boatswain to his father, who lives in the old marketplace. The old marketplace has long been pulled down, and there now stands a church upon the spot. Impossible, replied the seaman. Here is another from myself to my sweetheart, Vrouw Ketzer, with money to buy her a new brooch. Philip shook his head. I remember seeing an old lady of that name buried some 30 years ago. Impossible, I left her young and blooming. Here's for the house of Slutz & Co., to whom the ship belongs. There's no such house now, replied Philip, but I have heard that many years ago there was a firm of that name. Impossible, you must be laughing at me. Here is a letter from our captain to his son. Give it me, cried Philip, seizing the letter. He was about to break the seal when Shrifton snatched it out of his hand and threw it over the lee gunwale. That's a scurvy trick for an old shipmate, observed the seaman. Shrifton made no reply, but catching up the other letters which Philip had laid down on the capstan, he hurled them after the first. The strange seaman shed tears and walked again to the side. It is very hard, very unkind, observed he as he descended. The time may come when you may wish that your family should know your situation. So saying, he disappeared. In a few seconds was heard the sound of the oars retreating from the ship. Holy Saint Antonio! Exclaimed the captain. I am lost in wonder and fright. Steward, bring me up the arrack. The steward ran down for the bottle. Being as much alarmed as his captain, he helped himself before he brought it up to his commander. Now, said the captain, after keeping his mouth for 2 minutes to the bottle and draining it to the bottom, what is to be done next? I'll tell you, said Shrifton, going up to him. That man there has a charm hung round his neck. Take it from him and throw it overboard, and your ship will be saved. If not, it will be lost, with every soul on board. Yes, it's all right, depend on it, cried the sailors. Fools, replied Philip. Do you believe that wretch? Did you not hear the man who came on board recognise him and call him shipmate? He is the party whose presence on board will prove so unfortunate. Yes, cried the sailors. It's all right, the man did call him shipmate. I tell you it's all wrong, cried Shrifton. That is the man. Let him give up the charm. Yes, let him give up the charm, cried the sailors, and they rushed back upon Philip. Philip started back to where the captain stood. "Madmen! Know ye what ye are about? It is the holy cross that I wear round my neck. Throw it overboard if you dare, and your souls are lost for ever." And Philip took the relic from his bosom and showed it to the captain. No, no, men," exclaimed the captain, who was now more settled in his nerves. "That won't do. The saints protect us." The seamen, however, became clamorous. One portion were for throwing Shrifton overboard, the other for throwing Philip. At last the point was decided by the captain, who directed the small skiff hanging astern to be lowered down, and ordered both Philip and Shrifton to get into it. The seamen approved of this arrangement, as it satisfied both parties. Philip made no objection. Shrifton screamed and fought, but he was tossed into the boat. There he remained, trembling in the stern sheets, while Philip, who had seized the sculls, pulled away from the vessel in the direction of the phantom ship. In a few minutes the vessel which Philip and Shrifton had left was no longer to be discerned through the thick haze. The phantom ship was still in sight, but at a much greater distance from them than she was before. Philip pulled hard towards her, but although hove to, she appeared to increase her distance from the boat. For a short time he paused on his oars to regain his breath, when Shrifton rose up and took his seat in the stern sheets of the boat. "You may pull and pull, Philip Vanderdecken," observed Shrifton, "but you will not gain that ship. No, no, that cannot be. We may have a long cruise together, but you will be as far from your object at the end of it as you are now at the commencement." "Why don't you throw me overboard again? You would be all the lighter." "I threw you overboard in a state of frenzy," replied Philip, "when you attempted to force from me my relic." "And have I not endeavoured to make others take it from you this very day? Have I not?" "You have," rejoined Philip, "but I am now convinced that you are as unhappy as myself, and that in what you are doing you are only following your destiny, as I am mine. Why and wherefore I cannot tell, but we are both engaged in the same mystery. If the success of my endeavours depends upon guarding the relic, the success of yours depends upon your obtaining it, and defeating my purpose by so doing. In this matter we are both agents, and you have been, as far as my mission is concerned, my most active enemy. But, Shrifton, I have not forgotten, and never will, that you kindlily did advise my poor Amina, that you prophesied to her what would be her fate, and if she did not listen to your counsel, that you were no enemy of hers, although you have been and still are mine. Although my enemy, for her sake, I forgive you, and will not attempt to harm you." "You do, then, forgive your enemy, Philip Vanderdecken?" replied Shrifton mournfully, "for such I acknowledge myself to be." "I do, with all my heart, with all my soul," replied Philip. "Then you have conquered me, Philip Vanderdecken. You have now made me your friend, and your wishes are about to be accomplished. You would know who I am. Listen. When your father, defying the Almighty's will, in his rage took my life, he was vouchsafed a chance of his doom being cancelled through the merits of his son. I had also my appeal, which was for vengeance. It was granted that I should remain on earth and thwart your will. That as long as we were enemies, you should not succeed, but that when you had conformed to the highest attribute of Christianity, proved on the Holy Cross, that of forgiving your enemy, your task should be fulfilled. Philip Vanderdecken, you have forgiven your enemy, and both our destinies are now accomplished." As Shrifton spoke, Philip's eyes were fixed upon him. He extended his hand to Philip. It was taken, and as it was pressed, the form of the pilot wasted as it were into the air, and Philip found himself alone. "Father of mercy, I thank thee," said Philip, "that my task is done, and that I again may meet my Emina." Philip then pulled towards the phantom ship, and found that she no longer appeared to leave him. On the contrary, every minute he was nearer and nearer, and at last he threw in his oars, climbed her sides, and gained her deck. The crew of the vessel crowded round him. "Your captain," said Philip. "I must speak with your captain." "Who shall I say, sir?" demanded one who appeared to be the first mate. "Who?" replied Philip. "Tell him his son would speak to him. His son, Philip Vanderdecken." Shouts of laughter from the crew followed this answer of Philip's, and the mate, as soon as they ceased, observed with a smile, You forget, sir. Perhaps you would say his father." "Tell him is his son, if you please," replied Philip. "Take no note of grey hairs." "Well, sir, here he is, coming forward," replied the mate, stepping aside and pointing to the captain. "What is all this?" inquired the captain. "Are you Philip Vanderdecken, the captain of this vessel?" "I am, sir," replied the other. "You appear not to know me." "But how can you? You saw me but when I was only 3 years old. Yet may you remember a letter which you gave to your wife." "Ha!" replied the captain. "And who then are you?" "Time has stopped with you, but with those who live in the world he stops not, and for those who pass a life of misery he hurries on still faster. In me behold your son, Philip Vanderdecken, who has obeyed your wishes, and after a life of such peril and misery as few have passed, has at last fulfilled his vow, and now offers to his father the precious relic that he required to kiss." Philip drew out the relic and held it towards his father. As if a flash of lightning had passed through his mind, the captain of the vessel started back, clasped his hands, fell on his knees, and wept. "My son! My son!" exclaimed he, rising and throwing himself into Philip's arms. "My eyes are opened. The Almighty knows how long they have been obscured." Embracing each other, they walked aft, away from the men who were still crowded at the gangway. "My son, my noble son! Before the charm is broken, before we resolve, as we must, into the elements, oh, let me kneel in thanksgiving and contrition. My son, my noble son, receive a father's thanks," exclaimed Vanderdecken. Then, with tears of joy and penitence, he humbly addressed himself to that being whom he once so awfully defied. The elder Vanderdecken knelt down. Philip did the same, still embracing each other with one arm, while they raised on high the other and prayed. Excuse me. For the last time the relic was taken from the bosom of Philip and handed to his father, and his father raised his eyes to heaven and kissed it. And as he kissed it, the long, tapering upper spars of the phantom vessel, the yards and sails that were set, fell into dust, fluttered in the air, and sank upon the wave. Then mainmast, foremast, bowsprit, everything above the deck crumbled into atoms and disappeared. Again he raised the relic to his lips, and the work of destruction continued. The heavy iron guns sank through the decks and disappeared. The crew of the vessel who were looking on crumbled down into skeletons and dust and fragments of ragged garments, and there were none left on board the vessel in the semblance of life but the father and the son. Once more did he put the sacred emblem to his lips, and the beams and timber separated, the decks of the vessel slowly sank, and the remnants of the hull floated upon the water. And as the father and son, the one still young and vigorous, the other old and decrepit, still kneeling, still embracing with their hands raised to heaven, sank slowly under the deep blue wave. The lurid sky was, for a moment, illumined by a lightning cross. Then did the clouds which obscured the heavens roll away swift as thought. The sun again burst out in all his splendour. The rippling waves appeared to dance with joy. The screaming seagull again whirled in the air, and the sacred albatross once more slumbered on the wing. The porpoise tumbled and tossed in his sportive play. The albacore and dolphin leaped from the sparkling sea. All nature smiled as if it rejoiced that the charm was dissolved for ever, and that the phantom ship was no more. The end.